Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final session of this day here in track 2 with me. Just a reminder that if you wanted to hear it's Better Building Worlds, it's developing an online unit to support the needs of the next generation learners, return to the agenda and click to track 1. So let's begin now. Changes in structures catalyzed by online education from IP and copyright to costs and budgets. Although this seems like a very broad topic, it really comes down to some very simple things that talk about structure and how structure sometimes needs to follow the modality of the offering. Years ago, centuries ago, we began with the idea of a classroom where the students were around the learned professor and learned with a lot of work going on in discussion, conversation, and learning. We moved from that to classrooms where the classroom started becoming almost the size of an amphitheater. We moved from that to the use of a variety of modes where we could actually get information through the use of computers and multiple screens. And then, of course, through the interactive mode, where we could bring people who were not in the same geographical location and share that with our classroom. And then over the last few years, especially over the last 18 months, we've moved to true digital immersion, where we could move from having the faculty member and the students in one location to actually having them in different locations, with every student being in a different location. We have to ask ourselves the question, although we've moved in terms of the modality of delivery, have we actually progressed to doing things in a different way? And specifically in a variety of different fields. If we look at it in terms of transition, it's actually very simple. The traditional university is face-to-face. It's location-bound. It has fixed hours and times. It has a fixed course structure. Students are generally termed as users, and it's mainly, although we try not to keep it that way, it's mainly a passive process where someone lectures and the students take in that information, although more and more we're having active classrooms. The teaching is a process, and it's really aimed at one individual to the rest of the group, meaning you have an instructor and then you have a lot of students. Online learning, on the other hand, changed this completely. It's networked, it's anytime, any place. You're not constrained by geographical location. It's very time, 24/7. Your courses can be adaptive with alternatives for the slow learner and the fast learner, for those who need more material versus those who need less material. Students very often now consider themselves consumers. Active learning becomes the norm. Learning is now the outcome rather than just teaching being the process, and it is far easier to work with groups. The effect, however, is that a lot of our services have to be online. Students are no longer in a certain room, but they could actually be global. Services are needed 24/7, 365, or at least that's the expectation. You have multiple options, modes for the delivery and for how you interact with people. There is an expectation from our students that the consumer is always correct. Technology becomes the driver rather than geographical space. The environment is the key over here, and the multiple modes in which instruction and learning can be affected. We need to therefore think in different ways, and the challenge often is that we're trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. We've changed the environment substantially, but not our way of interacting with it. And the structure of the university often has to be changed. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about different topics that we've seen, but I'm going to try to focus in on a few important points as aspects for consideration. The first is, are online courses equivalent to traditional face-to-face courses in terms of content and ownership? What does engagement and the educational experience mean in an online environment as far as this is concerned? What are the differences in academic structure and costs that need to be kept in mind for effective and efficient online learning? Before we go into it, an important proviso. This is not a legal or financial presentation. This is a series of thoughts and experiences that is handed to you. Let's look at the traditional role of faculty. We're all very, very familiar with that. Teaching is based on the expertise of the faculty member, with the faculty member having almost full control on the methodology of delivery especially when it's in the classroom, the structure of the course, the curriculum, the details of the content, and the assessment of performance within certain broad structural guidelines that are provided by the department, the college, and the institution. Course notes and materials are generally the purview of the faculty member. I put together my course notes, I own them. If I feel like it, I pass it on to a junior colleague or another colleague in the department, but if I don't, I keep them to myself, and the next person teaching that course or teaching it in the next semester can teach it in an entirely different way. US copyright law includes a work for hire doctrine. Generally, that says that work prepared in the scope of employment belongs to the employer, not the employee. But generally, across the globe, faculty have enjoyed a cultural exemption in the sense that non-patentable work, course notes, syllabi, exam questions belongs to the faculty member. In the past, the generic infrastructure that enabled learning was physical, bricks and mortar, and was provided by the institution. Teaching was primarily confined within that space, and it was only to students that have been selected, admitted, and handled by that institution. The online world changes all of that. It's to anyone, anywhere, from degree-based to open access, with very little need for fixed brick and mortar infrastructure. The infrastructure that is needed is more on the IT side, and therefore there is even more flexibility for the faculty member in how this is being offered. So we need to look at some considerations: an increased need for the uniformity in structure, presentation, and approach that is now being done by the university rather than just by the faculty member. Tremendous reliance on IT infrastructure that means tremendous amounts of investment that have to be made by an institution in IT infrastructure that is needed in order to make sure that the faculty can get their amounts of learning and knowledge to the students. New dynamics in terms of asynchronous and self-paced courses. Does this make a course now a commodity when it does not have to be offered face-to-face, when students actually may not even interact with the faculty member? Does this change it to where an online course material in some cases could be considered the same as books? What is included in the definition of a course note and materials? And very importantly, from an institutional standpoint, when does assistance, which can go from instructional designers, graphic designers, production work that is done, videographers, builders of simulations, so that we could truly have an immersion for the students in online education, when does that translate into ownership or part ownership for the institution as against that belonging just to the faculty member? So let's try to look at this from three separate, logistical issues. The first is that the faculty member stays at that university itself or within that institution. And if the faculty member continues teaching the same course, there's obviously no change. The faculty member puts together the course within the parts that have been defined by the institution of the department, and there is virtually no change in terms of how this can be considered. But what happens if the faculty member goes on leave and another faculty member is asked to teach using the materials developed by the first faculty member, or the course is offered in asynchronous format without the faculty member's permission or concurrence, or the faculty member simultaneously now uses the materials developed at one institution to teach at another institution or enterprise? Online is anytime, anywhere. Does that create a challenge? What happens when a faculty member leaves a university? Can they take that material that they've developed in toto with electronic files and recordings and automatically use them at another university? Can other faculty members at the same university use the material to continue teaching a course? Should a faculty member be paid additional compensation for the development of materials? Let's keep one thing in mind. A lot of people think that taking material online is very simple. It actually takes a significant amount of work, both on the faculty member's part and on everyone else's part, to create a good, high-quality online course. And sometimes faculty members are paid additionally to do this. Does that make it work for hire, or is it within the normal confines of the faculty member's work? There is obviously a lot of ambiguity in this, and we're still developing models for how this works forward. The university owns all materials. This is extremely rare, since we depend on the excellence and the dedication of our faculty. Therefore, in general, the cultural exemption that existed in the past has still been in place. The faculty member owns all materials developed, and very often what is done is that the university is given a limited term use after the faculty member leaves, in the sense that if a faculty member leaves in between for any reason, then through a responsibility to the students, faculty members do realize that the course has to be completed. Or at some universities, there is a clause that says that for a year after the faculty member leaves, that material, if online, can be used, but after that, the use is stopped, giving the university the chance to replace that faculty member when the faculty member has moved on to another place of work. Sometimes faculty members are paid to develop the material. In this case, some at the university say that the university owns the material outright, or the university has materials to use it for a specific period of time, after which the faculty member is again offered the opportunity to update the materials for a second payment. We have to keep in mind that even if it is online, material needs to be updated constantly, and faculty have to do a lot of work, not just in terms of the course material that is put together in terms of how they're lecturing, but the other work that is done electronically on the LMS in order to make the students get the best possible use of, let's say, learning. And in some cases, rare, the faculty member receives royalties in the use, whether it is per student or per course. All these models exist, and due thought needs to be given to how this is best applied at your institution. Let's just look at some examples. Yale, for example, has a very, very well-defined statement of ownership. It basically says that the university owns everything, but traditionally the university cedes ownership of scholarly writings to faculty authors, and scholarly writings include instructional content and materials originally authored by the individual instructor. Therefore, it makes it very clear that the change in modality from face-to-face in a classroom to the modality used in online learning has not changed the role between the faculty member and the institution. The University of Iowa has brought in a slight change to that by saying that there may be exceptions to this general rule, especially if the course creator received extra compensation from course development funds for a specific purpose of developing an online course, meaning it's not the normal course that the faculty member would teach as part of their responsibility, but a specially designed course that has become on top of the responsibility. Or a large amount of facilities from the university, media production, support staff, is greater than that normally provided to others in the department. Or it was team created and team taught, in which case, obviously, the amount that was contributed by one member versus that of the other would come into play. Or this came from a contract where obviously, just as before, the rules of the contract and the clauses in the contract might govern. Cal State Long Beach, a long time ago in 2013, actually made this a norm because of internal grants that were brought forward to support development of online education materials. They said that in the absence of a separate work for hire agreement, the faculty member had all intellectual property rights in all the course materials. What this really brings to forward is that we have to have certain aspects for consideration. It is very, very important that institutions have clear statement of policy regarding ownership, so that neither the faculty member nor the institution is caught unawares. In case of projects that could fit the work for hire principle, ownership needs to be addressed as early as possible. It's unfair to a faculty member to start the process and then after the faculty member has worked on it, to suddenly say, we own all the material. This needs to be upfront, especially when this is additional to what the faculty member would normally do. Courses need to be updated periodically. And this is even more the case in online material because we have to keep up to date because of the other material that is available online. And our students are probably clicking between websites in order to find out whether the data being used in the lecture was out of date. They do this in any case, face-to-face, and they do it more in online courses. Therefore, blind reuse year after year after year is not recommended. It's anecdotally, and this is just from a series of universities, the University of Florida looks at the updating of online materials at least once every 3 years, if not more often. The University of Nebraska is the same. It's NYU Engineering is at least every 2 years. And so Western Governors University does this every year on a rolling basis, as should be the norm. As we go forward, there are also some myths that need to be tackled. And some of these myths are things that we should understand. Price is not equal to cost. There are a lot of people who believe that online courses and online instruction is very cheap. It is actually as expensive, if not more expensive, to develop the course than it is to do it face-to-face, because all of the other supporting materials that have to be put in, plus the amount of time that the faculty member has to put to go from a face-to-face mode to a mode where you cannot actually see the faculty and the interaction between the faculty and the student all the time. Price depends on cost in academia very often. Clicks are cheaper than bricks. That's another myth that people believe in, that it's much cheaper to actually have something online and use IT than it is to have a building. IT itself can be very expensive, especially if you want students to have the best experience possible. Another myth is that online education only needs instructors and the internet, and therefore faculty, especially tenure track faculty, are not needed. This is a myth that needs to be thrown away as quickly as possible. Using adjuncts to just teach courses one after the other is not true education. We need our full-time faculty as well to be dedicated and committed to the role of learning and teaching. And therefore, while adjuncts have a very, very important role, we also need our full-time faculty. In fact, the role of the adjunct as becoming an integral part of the university is becoming more and more important as we go to this online mode. There is a myth that IT is very cheap, and it's nothing but that. Once a course is developed as an online offering, it has an infinite shelf life. Again, as I said before, it does not. In fact, the shelf life is far smaller than we have in the face-to-face world. We also have the myth that scale always makes things cheaper, and that's not true. As our classes become larger and larger in terms of enrollment, the amount of support services that need to be given and the amount of interaction that needs to go on between the faculty member and the students also increase. There is a myth that online students have no need for student support services, and you'd be surprised at how many of the support services in terms of wellness and health are actually needed by online students. And the cost of that, as well as the ways in which we have to offer them, must be kept in mind. So let's look at some considerations for costs. Obviously, there is the cost of the faculty. There is the cost of the IT infrastructure, including the LMS. And as we become more and more advanced in terms of the use of multimedia, the role of the LMS becomes more important, and therefore the cost of it. True online education is not a talking head with a lot of PowerPoint slides. It is actually immersive in the digital world with a lot of use of simulations, and therefore instructional designers, videographers, producers become more and more important so as to take the environment that is built by the faculty member and let them do much more. Quality of materials, instruction, support is actually dependent on the amount of investment that we're willing to make for that. A very important part of this is cybersecurity infrastructure. Not just in terms of someone doing a Zoom bomb, as we heard about over the last 18 months, but also the privacy of our students. And that becomes extremely important, and the information that is being shared on these. And so how do we do with compliance for accessibility? That becomes a cost in itself as we go into online teaching and learning. Software licenses, especially when they now are not just in a library or they happen to be in a computer lab, but have to be on every student's computer if we're truly to let them have the accessibility 24/7. The updating of materials, including links. We change our links on our websites, and other people change links on websites very often, but that means constantly our online material that is used in a course has to be checked in order to make sure that those links are the right ones. And our students have the expectation of student support 24/7. Now, obviously, we cannot have a faculty member staying awake 24/7 or working 24/7, and therefore we need to be able to decide whether we are going to give that support, and if so, who gives it? Does the role of the teaching assistant change? Do we now have online coaches who can be contacted by students as and when? So let's look at some examples of the cost and some of the variances in the cost. And I'm taking this data from a report that came out from Arizona State University a while ago that looked at making digital learning work. And they've done a tremendous job at looking at the costs and looking at what makes it work. And this was just some examples of some community colleges and universities as to whether larger online versus face-to-face classes yield ongoing savings. And that is true in some cases, but not necessarily in others. There is this myth very often that because it is being given to more and more students at the same time, the cost decreases. In fact, if we want learning to be at the same level or even better, we have to increase the amount of engagement. So for example, at some universities, what you have is the faculty member who teaches, and then you have online coaches that take the place of, let us say, a teaching assistant, except that every 25 students or every 30 students might actually have an online teaching assistant or coach. They might be receiving more individual attention than our students face-to-face. Cost, therefore, is actually increased over the cost that we have face-to-face. And this is something we have to keep in mind. There was a report in 2017 that came out from WSET. That's the Wiki Cooperative for Educational Technology, and Wiki stands for the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. It's a consortium of the 15 Western states and the US Pacific territories in the United States, and they did a very important study or a survey on the perception and the reality of price. And they looked at price comparison of tuition and total price for face-to-face and distance students. And they actually found that in a majority of cases, you actually saw that the price and the total price did not change. So there was no difference between face-to-face and online. And in some cases, the tuition was actually slightly more, but the total price was about the same. Cost comparison face-to-face and distance courses was about split, that in about 57%, there was no difference in cost. Now keep in mind, there's a difference between, as I mentioned before, cost and price. And in some cases, the online was allowed to cost more. And this is where the flexibility made more sense. An online MBA, for example, has more scope, for example, for the price and the cost to be more. If you start looking at it in terms of the costs to actually prepare the course, what you will find is that it actually takes more work in terms of accreditation and state authorizations, as well as technologies, whereas admissions and enrollment might actually cost a little less or is about the same. But keep in mind that universities have been progressing to do more of the 24/7 click as you come in terms for the enrollment and the admissions, at least in terms of the application process. So a lot of what would have been done primarily for online education has already been taking place for our normal way of its interaction with our students before they actually get admitted. If you look at the costs face-to-face versus a distance education, in terms of teaching the course, you'll actually find that design course specifications, it is more expensive online. Instructional design, as I mentioned before, because of all those factors, are also more expensive. Learning materials, because we now have the ability to use more learning materials and make it a more immersive learning by actual active learning, it could become more expensive for us. And accessibility and ADA compliance is definitely more expensive, at least at this point in time. If you look at costs compared to face-to-face on assessing student learning, you again see that the administration and the proctoring of assessments and verifying student identities is a little bit more expensive. We have to keep in mind over here that there's lots of discussion going on in this area in terms of privacy issues, and we haven't quite figured out the ideal way to assure the integrity of the academics versus the actual privacy issues that we have with students. And this is going to be an ongoing discussion and a very, very important one that needs to be kept in mind. If you look at supporting students and the faculty, again, what you see is in very few cases can you actually see that the costs are significantly less. So that myth that we had that online education is going to be significantly cheaper should actually be cast away. Online education, if done correctly, will cost about the same or sometimes be more expensive. Can we actually reach a larger audience? Can we increase the access to the wonderful work that our faculty do? Absolutely. Can we make it more flexible for our students so that they can actually have access to the material when and where they need it? Absolutely. But this is actually increasing and enlarging the scope and the depth of immersion that our students can get. So we shouldn't automatically assume that it's just going to be cheaper. What then brings down me to one of the most important things that we talk about. What is a university and has it changed? So let's take us back to the 19th century. John Henry Cardinal Newman, one of the forerunners of the modern university, said that it was the high protecting power of all knowledge and science, of fact and principle, of inquiry and discovery, of experimentation and speculation. It mapped out the terrain of the intellect. And I don't think there's a single person in academia today who would disagree with that. This is what the university should be. This is the fountain of education, of knowledge, of discovery. And this is what we should be doing more and more of. But if you go to 1936, so President Hutchins of the University of Chicago came up with something tongue-in-cheek, which unfortunately still exists today, but in some modified form. A series of separate schools and departments held together by a central heating system, a series of individual faculty entrepreneurs held together by a common grievance over parking. And so we have to ask ourselves, in 2021, obviously tongue-in-cheek, are we moving along the path of a series of separate programs run as a business by uncaring administrators, held together by a common fear of being replaced by adjuncts and/or online education? My answer to that is no. Online education really works when you actually have faculty who are as committed as they were before, faculty who are as much a part of the institution as they were before, and online education just becomes another tool in the palette that we have at the university to create more immersive education and to reach a larger group of students that would not have been possible before. With that, let me stop. I'm going to try to toggle over so I can take some of your questions. So I'm going to try to go through as many of these questions as possible. The first is, how do you pitch to senior management the importance of investing the money to ensure good service? I think that's a very, very important part for us to keep in mind. Senior management needs to be totally committed to education, not to a business, and therefore it's not to make a profit. It is to get the best knowledge possible to our students and enable our faculty to do the very best they can in disseminating that knowledge and ensuring learning. It is that pitch that has to be made. If we are truly to do the best thing possible, we're going to have to invest money in it. What we get out of it, the return, if you will, is the success of our students, the ability to have future generations do even better than we have in past generations, the ability for us to keep up with technological advancements and use those technological advancements in order to benefit our students. And more important than anything else is to be able to make sure that our students, irrespective of where they came from and the challenges that they face, can actually get the services that they need from us so that truly its education can not just be the opener of doors and opportunities, but can enable social mobility. The next question is, do you think future students will end up paying the price via fees, etc., for resources moving online over the last year? That's a good question, and I'm not sure that there will be a change. I think a lot of universities have actually moved online, but we have to be very, very careful in trying to differentiate between remote emergency teaching that was done in a lot of cases and true online education. As I mentioned before, the idea of having a talking head, just as you have with me right now, with PowerPoint slides is not true online education. When we actually go into true online education, we actually have to make the investments. But those investments become part of what a university has to plan for. And I don't think it is fair for us to keep the prices going up and up just because we are using new tools. We have to be able to make the right choices between old tools that are no longer needed and new tools that have to be added on to make sure that our students get the very best knowledge and our faculty are able to do the very best at what they are so passionate about, which is actually moving education forward. I think we have time for one more question, and I'll take the last question over here. Do you think that cost might be a barrier to producing next generation education of the highest standards as we move more and more to online learning? Could we end up seeing a two-tier higher education offering? I would hope not. I would hope that we don't go to a two-tier, but as I said before, we go with a palette, which is basically what can we do in the best way possible. There's certain things that are always going to be much better face-to-face, the engagement, the social interaction, the way that our students learn, not just in the classroom, but outside, the way a faculty member interacts with a student, both inside the classroom and as they're walking to class and outside class. And then what we can also do through the use of immersive technologies and simulations that might not be possible in a classroom. I think that balance is going to be there. So I don't think we should be seeing a two-tier, but we're going to have to pay a lot of attention to that.